Okay, we are beginning a new Chumash Vayikra, and Chumash Vayikra begins with a Rashi that we really should chazer more often than once a year. Vayikra el Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls to Moshe, and this Vayikra el Moshe seems to be a davar noisef, something more than the regular Hashem speaking to Moshe, because the pasuk goes on to say Vayidaber Hashem Elav. So one would imagine that Chumash Vayikra could have begun with Vayidaber Hashem El Moshe, May Ohel Moed Leimor, if you want to mention the Ohel Moed. Vayikra El Moshe seems to be saying something else. Now, this is a big discussion here, Rashi, the Ramban, but Rashi says that Vayikra El Moshe is spelled out here. But really, there was always a Vayikra El Moshe. Whenever there's Vayidaber Hashem El Moshe Leimor, there's a Hakdama of Vayikra El Moshe. Zokt Rashi, L'chol dibros, u'l'chol amiros, u'l'chol tzivuyim, kadma kriya. That's very expressive of Rashi. To all the dibors, to all the amiras, and to all the tzivuyim. There was always a kriya first. Lashon chiba. Chazal explained the Lashon chiba is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would say, Moshe, Moshe, every time before he spoke to him. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimor, Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Before Daber el Bnei Yisrael was Moshe, Moshe. And Chazal say, the Teres Kayanim says, Moshe would respond, Hineini. So there was this back and forth, this summoning of Moshe, and Moshe expressing his readiness to the Shmayas Devar Hashem, Nasa v'Nishma. Every time there was a Dibur el Moshe. There's it's interesting. There are other approaches to this Vayikra El Moshe that are expressed that seem to explain why it's dafka here. For example, Rashi says, I think in the end of Chumash Shemais, and the Ramban brings that that Moshe was Nisyare. Moshe was concerned about entering the Mishkan, because Uchvayid Hashem Malayas HaMishkan, and therefore Vayikra El Moshe is telling us in this case, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe that even though Uchvayid Hashem Malayas HaMishkan, I still want you to come in. He's being mazmin him to come in. So it makes sense that Vayikra El Moshe is here. But according to this mahalach of Rashi, that l'chol dibros, u'l'chol amiros, u'l'chol tzivuyim, kadma kriya, one has to wonder why the Torah chose the beginning of Chumash Vayikra to begin with the word Vayikra. We call the whole Chumash Vayikra. Now Reb Tzadok says something. It's very, very empowering and very mechazik in terms of how we relate to our avodas Hashem. Reb Tzadok says that we know that Moshe is Shakol Keneged Kol Yisrael. We know that Moshe represents the Nishmas Yisrael, the connection of the Klal Yisrael to Torah and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if L'chol Dibros or L'chol Tzivuyim or L'chol Amiros Kadma Kriya, so that means that every time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a command for us, every time HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do something, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to daven Ma'ariv, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to make Yantif, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to learn Torah, L'chol Dibros, U'l'chol Amiros, U'l'chol Tzivuyim, Kadma Kriya. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls out to us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu invites us for the incalculable role of serving Him, of serving the King of Kings. And Reb Tzadok encourages us that we should hear that call, that Moshe, Moshe, that's being called to each one of us when it comes time to do a mitzvah, and we should respond as Moshe did. Hineini, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm here. I'm making myself available. I'm present. I'm focused. I'm opening my arms. I am ready to be makabel, the job, the mission that you're sending me to do. This would be true whether it's the missions that we all share, like what I mentioned earlier, Pesach or Ma'ariv or Limud HaTorah. it's also true about the individual mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives for each of us, because as a person goes through life, a person is very blessed to discover the role that Hashem has for him in this world, and the mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, and no two people have the same journey, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls us to different, to be misakeh in different things, to deal with different kinds of challenges, to be achroi for a mishpacha, for a tzibur, for oneself, for the world, and to consider ourselves to be carrying a mission. So again, there's the mission of 613 mitzvahs that we all share equally, and then there's all of the other parts of our avodah that are miyuchet for us. The minig that I took upon myself, maybe you didn't, but I did. The chumrah that you took upon yourself for whatever reason, maybe I didn't, but you did. The mission in Klal Yisrael that maybe you took upon yourself, that wasn't my mission, but it was your mission, and you picked that up. And that's also a lashon of Moshe, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls out to us. And then people go through life, and sometimes part of the journey of going through life is discovering the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu carved out for us to do our avodah. Sometimes it shifts dramatically and instantly, and sometimes it matures and drifts over time. But there's a certain sense in our avodah in terms of fulfilling what it says in Shulchan Aruch, and our avodah in terms of our own personal mahalach of growth in our lives, to say Hineini, to the Rabbi Shalom doing it, which is what? Which means to be meichin ourselves for avodah, to prepare ourselves to serve Hashem. Not to go in beli das, not to go in without going in without hachana is going in not like a mensch, is going in without thought, without das. I spoke to my bachram this morning about preparing for Ben Azmanim. Remember there was such a thing? So we talked about preparing for Ben Azmanim, and I begged them. One thing. I said, there's one thing. It's a life-changing thing. Don't go into Ben Azman without thinking about it first. What's it going to be like? What am I going to do? What are the challenges? What's the mahalach? And I said, while I'm at it, don't go into anything without thinking about it first. That's what it means to be a bardas. A bardas doesn't just go with his impulses and his instincts. He's meichen himself. Vayomer Hineini. That's a hachana. Being meichen atzmai to an avodah. Vayomer Hineini. If you think about it like that I think I'm saying is reasonable, if you think about it, Vayikra is the place to do it. Because Vayikra is the beginning of the Avodas HaKarbanos, and the carbon is the Avodah that kind of sums up the Avodah of a person on this world. And that's why this came up. I'll bring it out like this, just for the geschmack, especially for those that were involved with this. A few weeks ago, I spoke about it upstairs on Leil Shabbos. We had a chabura about it. We talked about the din of Shesuye Yayin. One of our hachanos. Speaking of hachana, one of our hachanos for Purim was to learn the halachas of Shesuye Yayin, legabi tefillah, legabi different things, and if you learn the sugya of Shesuya Yayin, it begins with Psukim and Parshas Nasai, I believe, Shragal Taiva, right? The Shnei B'nai Aaron, and the Shirish Hakol is the Isser to be Nichnas LaMikdash after one drinks Yayin, to go into the Mikdash, to go into the Beis HaMikdash intoxicated. There's a Chi of Misa to go into the Beis HaMikdash intoxicated. It's the most severe of Isurim. And when we were learning that, I couldn't help myself at the time but to express that there's a reason for that. Because the Beis HaMikdash was a place for the Avodah of an Adam. And an Adam is someone with das, with seichel, is someone who's not driven by his impulses, but uses thoughtfulness and preparation and consideration to guide his life and his decisions. That's what an Adam is. When a person drinks yayin, that the nature of wine is that it fogs up a person's kayach hadas, like on Purim, where the mitzvah is, for whatever reason it is on Purim, we call it lo yada, not das. But that means that yayin, wine, obscures the das, the seichel of a person. That is the worst possible way to walk into the Beis HaMikdash, because the Beis HaMikdash is the place for the avodah of an Adam. And that's why Parshas Vayikra begins with the word Adam. Right? It doesn't say Ish ki yakriv mikem karban lashem. It says Adam ki yakriv mikem karban lashem. And look in Chazal. Look in Chazal that they learn out the Isser of Gazel by Karmanis from there, because Adam Arishan didn't have Gazel. We refer that Adam is Adam Arishan. It's Adam. The concept of Adam. It's not just a man, or else it would have said Ish. And it's true that Chazal darshan the word Adam, but there's a deeper meaning here that the Torah is saying, Karbanos. Karbanos is about your Tzuras Adam. The concept of what's done in the Beis HaMikdash is the establishment of yourself as a servant of Hashem. Lamashal, the Ramban who explains, like, what does Hashem need us to sacrifice animals? What does Hashem need that for? Hashem doesn't get hungry for meat. I think we could all agree on that basic principle. So what does Hashem need that for? Of course, it goes very deep, and if you look at the Ramban, it's not our job to understand it, but if you look at what the Ramban writes, Al Pi Kabbalah, you realize that we are well above our heads trying to understand the depth of the mitzvah of Karbanos. But the Ramban does us a tremendous chesed, and that is that even though he describes it Al Pi Kabbalah, he says, let me also explain it in a way that we can all understand. And he explains that we all have different chalakim. We have our neshama and our seichel that so desperately wants to serve Hashem and is so sensitive to ruchnias. Vani kirvas elekim li tov. So a certain sense that this is what I want. I want to be close to Hashem. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu also gifted us with a body that has other agendas, and it wants other things. It wants comfort. It wants to not move so much. It's atzlan. It's lazy. It doesn't like to move. It wants to experience pleasure and joy, and it's not motivated. The guf is not motivated to serve Hashem. But we know that there's an avodah of learning how to motivate the guf to serve Hashem, and how to bring the neshama and the guf together to create a oneness inside of us, so that we serve Hashem together. Tzama nafshi le'lekim lekel chai. Libiu v'sari, my flesh sings to Hashem. Yiranenu lekel chai. There's such a thing as being ma'oyer that even my guf wants to serve Hashem. David HaMelech said, Libi cholol bekirbi, my heart is dead within me. Chazal explain that it doesn't mean his heart was dead. If you read Tehillim, you see he was anything but dead. There was nobody more alive. What he meant was that he had managed to bring to its knees every ratzon that was against the ratzon Hashem. Like Adam ki yamos ba'oil, ein Adam zaycha b'tayr elam kein meimis atzmai aleha. He was able to get rid of all other desires except for the desire to serve Hashem. And that's why David HaMelech is the one who's known to have said about himself that every time I try to go take care of mundane activities, Raglai, my lichas aisi lebeis hamedrash, my legs just bring me back to the beis medrash. My legs. It's very, very specific. It doesn't just say I wind up in the beis medrash. The regel is the part of the body that's furthest from the seichel. Right? Our feet are the part of the body that's furthest from the seichel. When David HaMelech says Raglai my lichan oisi lebeis hamedrash, he means that my ratzon to serve Hashem has penetrated every part of me, even my guf, even the animal part of me is yearning, is thirsting to serve Hashem. Raglai my lichan oisi lebeis hamedrash. By the way, we daven for this every day. We've talked about this before. We daven for this every day when we ask Hashem. Shagafav, you know what I'm about to say? That we should have habits that reflect your Torah. Shetargilenu, a hergel of Torah. No? We're asking, Raglai Malichas Aisi Leveis HaMedrash. Ner L'Ragli Dvarecha. David HaMelech tells Hashem, your words are a flame for my legs. Ner L'Ragli Dvarecha. The Pashup Pshat is that it shows me the way. But there's a deeper meaning there. That your Torah, Hashem, has penetrated me so deeply that it goes all the way L'Ragli. Ner L'Ragli Dvarecha. the Orla Nesivasi. If that's the way we understand, says the Ramban, that's why there's an act of putting an animal on the Mizbeach and like sending it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, because that's a model of what we're doing with our lives. And it's an act of showing Hashem, that part of me, that physical part of me, I'm giving it over to you. We don't sacrifice ourselves on the Mizbeach. Avram was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak if necessary, but we don't sacrifice ourselves because we want to devote the rest of our lives to serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up the Avodah, but rather we put the animal there and we say Yadav bimkaim Yadeinu and Raglav bimkaim Ragleinu Zechalifasi Zetmurasi. Like we put the animal there in our stead and we say this act of sending the Gashmias of the animal up to Hashem, that's how I'm devoting my life. I'm giving my life to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Why do you need how's that tying with? You need something physical to do that to show that you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean it's an act of. First of all, it's symbolic of it, and second of all, it's actually it because the behema also is my nechasim. It's my kesef. It's my gashmias, right? It's a tremendous act of devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do that. So if the Torah was going to choose a place to say, you don't just impulsively find yourself serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're called, you're summoned by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kadma kriya shel chiba, Moshe. And you consider, and you respond with your chiyas and your ratzon and your desire to serve Hashem. The place to put that is where it's going to say, Adam ki akrev mikem. By Yikra el Moshe, by Yedaber Hashem Elov, Hashem summons Moshe, and Moshe prepares himself to enter the world of Avodah, and these words, Adam ki Yaakov mikem, encapsulate the entire world of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm speaking about this now, not just because it's the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, but because of a vart that I once tied to my father when I was about 8 years old. I don't remember saying it, but my father has said it over to me a few times. Because we were learning in yeshiva that the Seder has to start after Tzeis HaKechavim. We don't do Taisvis Yamtif on Pesach. I'm saying we're Makabel the Kedushas HaYom, but there's no Pesach starts when it starts because you have to wait until it's Vada Elayla. So you don't start early because it has to be Pesach. So as a little boy, I once said to my father, Pesach doesn't lose out because we prepare for Pesach a month before. The Etzem Pesach starts a month early. Right? By the time the Purim Suda is over, we're holding in Pesach. Shloshim Yom Kodim Achai will be Yom HaPurim Atzma. Right? So we're be'etzem Pesach has the greatest hachana, not the least hachana. We're wrapped up in the hachanas for Pesach. So what better time is there to focus on the concept of being summoned to do a mitzvah than when we're coming here, even getting together for a shir, trying to figure out how we're preparing for Pesach. That's weighing on all of our minds, and certainly our wives' minds. The mashal, the object that represents for us, for all time and all history, the concept of preparing oneself for Avodah is the kiyar. The kiyar is a keli whose purpose is hachana, right? V'rachatzu yedayim v'ragleim v'lo yamusu. Its purpose is its function is hachana, is preparation. And so incredible and so counterintuitive that the kiyar was a keli in the Beis HaMikdash. It doesn't make sense. The Beis HaMikdash is for serving Hashem. It's not for preparing me to serve Hashem. Someone goes to his wedding. He takes a shower at home. And then he comes prepared to do what he does by his chasana. The shower is not by the chasana. That's the avodah. That's the makam avodah. But that's not the way it is by the Beis HaMikdash. By the Beis HaMikdash, one of the Klei HaMikdash is the vessel of preparing to do the Avodah. It's a mind-boggling chiddush. One of the vessels in the Mishkan is the one that you wash your hands and feet. One would have thought that would be a sink in the back. And it didn't have to be made out of copper. It could be made out of anything, because it doesn't matter. It's not so important. We were talking about this recently. Well, there's a lot of the kiyos mentioned many times in the last few parshiyos. They were talking about that, like, you go to a chasana and there's a beautiful, beautiful hall, right? It's beautiful, and there's fabric wallpaper, and there's chandeliers, and there's a hardwood floor, and there's banisters and carpets and moldings and mirrors, right? It's beautiful. But if you find yourself in the kitchen, which me, always looking for a quiet place to talk on the phone, often do, you find yourself in the kitchen, there's no moldings. It's usually dirty white cinder blocks. That's what it usually is. No? That part of the hall. There's no drapes. There's no moldings. There's no mirrors. Because that's not the hall. That's the preparation. That's where they prepare the food. The food's not served there. That's where it's prepared. But that's not the way it was in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, the vessel that was used for preparation, prepare this keli of hachana. And you see from here that preparing to do a mitzvah is a chashuv part of doing that mitzvah. I always love to say over that the kiyar is the only keli that has its own hachana. Es hakiyar ve'es kanoi. Of course it is the only keli that has its own hachana, because the kiyar is the keli of hachana. So it physically expresses its own essence, which is that it's a keli of hachana, so it has its own hachana. It has a stand. And that's what I'll get into that. And that's what really hachana is. Hachana is, in your nefesh, the platform that you build that your avodah goes on top of. No? It's the hachana that you create within yourself that you can do your avodah based on that. So the kiyar v'kanoi represents the whole concept of a kiyar. Shraga Feivel says that last week's parsha we said that the kiyar was made b'maros hatzayvos. It was made out of mirrors. The women donated. They didn't use glass for mirrors in those days. They used polished metals, and they used to use nechoshes, copper. And the women all had mirrors, as women do, and the women gave their mirrors over. There was a shaila about accepting the mirrors, but ultimately it was considered a davar shebekedusha, and the mirrors, the women sacrificed their own, making themselves beautiful with mirrors. They sacrificed to give over to the Beis HaMikdash. Lashon of the Even Ezra. Shraga Feivel, I don't know if you've seen this, but just adds to the point here. The Lashon of the Even Ezra, listen to this. This is like incredible. He says, Hineini, hayu b'Yisrael, I'm reading the Even Ezra on Lamed Ches. Okay? He says, Hineini, hayu b'Yisrael nashim, oivdois Hashem, shesaru mitayvos zeha olam. They turned away from the desires of this world, and to demonstrate that, v'nosnu mar oisehem nedava, they gave their mirrors as a gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ke'ein lahem tzorech oid lehisyapos. They didn't feel a need anymore to make themselves beautiful. And listen, it doesn't end there. It wasn't just about what they don't do. It was also about what they do. Rak, how did they spend their time? Ba'ois yoim yoim. They came each day, el Pesach Oyel Moed, to the doorway of the Oyel Moed, lehispalel to daven, v'lishmoya divrei hamitzvos, and to listen to the mitzvahs. Hafle v'fela. He says, "V'zehu asher tzav'u Pesach Ohel Moed." Okay, so, and if you think so, Shraga Feivel is telling too, and correctly so, that this keli, this vessel of preparation, has its own preparation and has a stand, and it's made out of objects that are used in preparation. Unbelievable. But if you think about what we're saying about the value and the preciousness and the greatness of hachana, you could understand it in that mashal. A woman prepares herself. A girl gets ready to go out. A kala gets ready for her chasana. In the preparation, in the making herself beautiful, how much yearning goes into that? How much dreaming about the future? How much hoping for connection? For how much kaichais hanefesh have those mirrors witnessed? And that the pasuk is telling us, the Vayikra El Moshe is telling us that that's how we prepare for a mitzvah, with all of that ga'aguim and all of that yearning and all of that cheshek for that mayed, for that meeting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Haflei v'afela. Reb Tzadok points out that the first Mishnah in Shas says, "Me'emasai kairin shema ba'arvis, misha'a shehakayhanim nichnasim le'achol b'trumasam." We say Shema at night. The sugya explains that the Zman Kriya Shema Shal Arvis is at the time of Harav Shemesh. Harav Shemesh means that a kohen became tamei, and he went to the mikveh, and the halacha is that you have to wait until the sun sets before you can eat truma. So at the time that the kohanim are permitted to eat truma, that's the time that we say Shema at night. That's what the Mishnah says. For Reb Tzadok, why doesn't it just say Me'emasai kairin Shema ba'arvis mishasha hakayanim oichlim b'trumasa? Why does it say mishasha hakayanim nichnasim, that they enter to eat their truma? They eat their truma. They enter to eat their truma. What is that? He says the first Mishnah in Shas wants to tell you, you don't impulsively do mitzvahs. You're nichnasim le'echol b'trumasam. You have to enter. You have to be thoughtful and deliberate when you do something, when you prepare for a mitzvah. You're nichnasim le'echol b'trumasam. This Shabbos, this past Shabbos, I was away, and I had the unbelievable schus of hearing Rabbi Sachs speak a few times. And he said over in Even Ezra, which is what brought me to this Even Ezra, he said over in Even Ezra that I was not aware of, and I think it just takes everything that we're saying and just brings it to another awareness. He says, how big was the kier supposed to be? It doesn't say. What are how much copper? They collected copper for the kier. How much copper did they collect? Doesn't say. So the Even Ezra says, "V'lo hizkir hakasav midas hakir." The Torah does not mention the dimensions of the kiyur. Ka'asher hizkir midas hakiyorim sha'asa shleima. Right, Shleima Melech had kiyur. It says the measurements of them. Rak nasa, the kiyur was made b'chol hamaros sheheviu. Anybody that had a mirror to give, guaranteed it's going to be included in the kiyur. We're not leaving out a single mirror. If there wasn't enough, if someone gave gold and you had to build the Aron and it was too much gold, it didn't go into the Aron, it went into something else. I know there's an Arachayim HaKadosh that somehow everything found its way in, but in terms, the dimensions tell you it has to be a certain amount. The kiyur, the Torah says, as much as the women give, that's what we are going to take. That's going to be the size of the kiyur. Said Rabbi Sachs, I think such a thoughtful thing. He said, mitzvahs, we have to do the way they're told to do. He said, how long does it take to eat matzah? Kedei achilas pras, however long that is. A few minutes. How long does it take to shake a lulav? Done. Shook the lulav. If you do your na'anuim, another few seconds. It takes no time. How long does it take to prepare to shake a lulav? That's endless. That's endless. How much passion, how much yearning, how much kaichas, how big you build the platform to do the mitzvah, that's endless. See, he said the vessels of avodah, they are measured, because they're a dinim of a mitzvah, they have a start and a finish. but the passion that you put into a mitzvah, the hachana, the preparation that you put into a mitzvah, the yearning that you put into a mitzvah, that is limitless. As much as you yearn, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take it. As much as you wait for that moment that you can say, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu ala achilas matzah. All of the kaiches that we put into making that happen, spending the tremendous amount of money on matzah, cleaning our houses to prepare them to be able to host the Pesach, doing all the other mitzvahs of the Seder, leading up to this moment, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu ala achilas matzah. All of that Hashem includes in the mitzvah of matzah. That doesn't have a gvul. That doesn't have a beginning or an end. That's all the passion and yearning and preparation and thoughtfulness and hachana to a mitzvah. That nichnasim lechel v'trumasam, that is limitless. The doorway of that nichnasim is limitless. And I think it's something for us to be machazik ourselves as we go into this Parshas Vayikra. Next Shabbos is already Shabbos Agada. So this this Parshas Vayikra, getting ready, Mechiras Chametz. We're going to start Be'ezra Hashem next week. We're going to start Mechiras Chametz, and and everything that each one of us has to do, and all the personal cheshbonos and maisim and hanhagos that each one of us has to go through to be ready for the Yitzias Mitzrayim that we're going to experience. Tavshin Pei Vav, Yitzias Mitzrayim, Tavshin Pei Vav, and boy, can we use some Yitzias Mitzrayim right now. So all of that this is our signal. This is our signal to start being meichen ourselves. Take out Sfarim and learn about the inyanim of the Yantif. Take out halacha Sfarim and learn the halachas of the Yantif. Prepare with a smile on your face. It's a carbon, it's a kiyar. The preparation also, if we prepare in a rotten mood, but it's a kiyar, it's also a keli in the mikdash. The preparation is also a keli in the mikdash. So the hislavos and the simcha and the ga'aguim with which we prepare is also part of the avodah. Right? That's what comes out. So let's prepare with a certain hislavos. Let's try. It's very difficult. Yantif could be stressful, and it could sometimes rub against Shalom Bayis a little bit, the stresses of Erev Yantif. Let's try to use our kaichas. We're not perfect. We're not perfect. And our wives aren't perfect. But let's try to gather our strength to prepare for Yantif with passion, with geshmak, with simcha. And Be'ezer Hashem will be zeicha to be able to be nichnasim. Lecha will be able to be nichnas, beroiv pe'er v'hadar, and to be mekayim the mitzvahs of Yantif. Yashikayach.